Hello and welcome to our first top 10 games of 22 video. I've been really excited about doing this. I want to do more YouTube content in 2023, and I thought I'd start by making our biggest article of the year also a video. We haven't been doing a video portion of this list, but our best of 22 event is going to change that. So I'm really excited about this. It's gonna be a lot of fun. We get to celebrate some of the games that I really liked. So let's dive into it. But let's talk about 2022. And another year has come and gone. It's time for one of my absolute favorite times of the year, where we get to celebrate our annual event, and we get to celebrate all kinds of things from the past year. One of which is going to be this topic, celebrating the top 10 2022. However, before we dive into our main list and start listing off these games, I have to get something off my chest, and I have to be transparent and upfront with something, or else my comment section is going to be just filled with hate, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be anyways. And let me explain why. 2022 could easily be described as a tale of two games. 2022 really just is the year of God of War Ragnarok versus Elden Ring. And in most outlets, Elden Ring not only was in top 2, it was also the Game of the Year winner for just about every major outlet. It was the Game of the Year at the Game Awards, and it was the Game of the Year for like a lot of the major outlets. In fact, most top 10 lists you will see it either in number 1 or number 2 as that close battle between God of War Ragnarok and Elden Ring. This is not going to be that video, and this is not going to be that list. Here's the thing, I have to confess. I did not like Elden Ring. I'm sorry. I gave it a try. I did not enjoy it. Its style is just not my cup of tea. I do not enjoy Souls-like games. I tried it. It wasn't for me. So all the Elden Ring fans out there, I'm sorry. We get it. You loved it. It won Game of the Year at the Game Awards. It's just, I get it. It's Game of the Year for everyone else. It's not Game Infinite's pick. And the thing is just because I didn't like it doesn't mean I'm saying it's a bad game. It's just I have my reasons for not liking it. It wasn't for me. And I didn't like it, so I'm sorry. So if it helps you not dismiss this video, pretend this video is titled "Besides Elden Ring, what are the best games of the year?" article or video. So pretend that that's what it is. I play a lot of games each year, and we really heavily supported indie games. Each year, I debate merging it and making it a AAA only list, or just bringing it together, or just I always debate my strategy, but in the end what I do is I treat this as like a AAA leaning list with only like 1 or 2 or 3 indie picks, and then I have a separate article where I focus on just the top 10 indie games. So for here, expect mostly AAA titles with a handful of the best indie titles. And if you really want your indie fix, go check out our top 10 indie list article on GameInfinite.net/news. Check that one out. Some rules for my list is it has to be our qualifying year from December 1st to 2021 through December 1st, 2022. So any game that released after December 1st of last year can qualify for this list. This allows me to not rush through December games. So there were some December games this year that are really good, or ones that I really want to try out that I haven't had a chance to play yet. So games like Need for Speed and High on Life both look amazing, but I'm going to save that for next year. Or actually this year now at the time of recording. I have a few other rules, like if it had a 1.0 release or early access in 2022, it can still count. Or if a game had a major cultural impact in 2022, like it was being discovered. So if a game technically released in a year before, but wasn't discovered by the masses, an example I use for that is like Among Us, like became a cultural phenomenon like a year or 2 after it came out. Or like geographical release dates differing. So like if something launched in a different part of the world but didn't launch in North America until this year, that counts as well. So there's certain rules. Remasters and ongoing games, so any games that are technically games from the years past, they're not allowed, and they get their own list. So that'll be an article for ongoing games and remasters. All right, so number 10, moving on. Overwatch 2, I gave it 8 out of 10. Overwatch 2 has dropped and been re-added from this list multiple times. I debated, should I just make it an honorable mention? Does it really deserve a spot here? It's not bad. It's almost like a DLC-filled remaster masquerading as a sequel. So it only barely counts in that regard. I said in my review it was one of the hardest games to review Because on one side, it had many reasons to kick it off this list. It just terrible, hilarious launch. Launch content was pretty sparse. Its newness often feels stale, and on the other hand, it's really fun. It's still at its core the game of the year 2016 of the original. They just added more than they took away. It did what the 2's job was, and that it brought me back. And it does have a lot of problems. I think its battle pass is terrible, and it just doesn't have a lot new to it. It launched without its campaign story mode. That was the biggest part of it, and it just really feels like technically it shouldn't be on this list, but from a fun factor, it saves its spot. This idea of the pseudo sequel is actually pretty great. It's a fantastic idea of how the era of live service can do sequels. And I want other major live sequels like Apex and Fortnite to look like this, where you can do a sequel with all of the newness and the maps and characters and all the new stuff, but migrating all the progression and skins and cosmetics that players have put thousands of hours into. It's a really great idea, even if their execution wasn't perfect. Did it justify the 2 making it a sequel? Probably not, but the 2 worked. And I asked myself, could a game that I will keep playing a lot of in 2023 really be kept off this list? It may not be the best, but it is one of the most fun games of the year. So I admit it's probably unfairly taking the position of another game that is technically better, but it is being very heavily weighted by its fun factor and nostalgia. It was just too hard to keep it off when it's still one of my favorite plays of the year. Fun factor, it's just really weighing heavily on this, even if the technical execution isn't there. And there are some games that I think maybe technically were better, that maybe were more deserving of the spot, but I enjoyed Overwatch 2 more. Number 9, Dying Light 2. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I also declared it the best co-op of 2022. Now, it might surprise you that this game is on the list, as it got very middling reviews and hasn't really gotten a lot of hoopla and celebration by major outlets. But the reason it's on my list is because, without even planning to, I accidentally stumbled on a better way to play this game that was way more enjoyable than the way the developers intended, the way that most reviewers probably played the game. You see, this game was marketed as a branching storyline, choices matter, very narrative-focused game that was focused on the single-player story. And it was most of the marketing was focused on the player choice, how all of your choices had this major impact on the game world, and it was a single-player focused game. And the problem is that is not how I played it, because I wasn't even planning on playing the game at all. I only played it because a friend of mine that wanted to play the game, really wanted to play it with me. So I played it with them. See, it came out at the same time as Elden Ring and Horizon Forbidden West and Lost Ark, and there were so many other major, massive games coming out in the same month that I just was going to skip it entirely, but my friend wanted to play it. And this game, when you play it co-op with a friend and kind of ignore the story, this game becomes a zombie apocalypse open world sandbox where you and a buddy, because this game has local co-op, and it has online co-op, and I played it with a friend online. And what's great is you can just run around this massive open map, kind of goof off, you can even share loot. And he was farther in the game than I was, so he was giving me these high tier weapons. So I had like this samurai sword that could one shot everything, and it was just stupid, goofy fun. This game should have been marketed as a co-op first multiplayer experience rather than the narrative focused single player experience that they marketed as. It has both, but when you play it the way the developers intended, it's very average, in my opinion. But when you kind of stumble upon the fact that they threw in co-op as a add-on, it's not the main way they intended people to play. But when you treat it like that, this game is so much better as a co-op experience. It's just you and a buddy running around this massive open map, occasionally running into zombies and fighting zombies and sharing loot. It feels like you're just surviving the apocalypse with a friend. If they had focused on the co-op experience, encouraged people to play that way, and made this a co-op first game, I think it would have been way more on the radar of other reviewers than it got. So this is a game where I accidentally played it the wrong way, and it was way better than what the developers intended. The Quarry. I gave it a 9 out of 10. This one is I was so happy turned out to be good. Supermassive Games, it's like an X that I've just given too many second chances to. Until Dawn is just a fantastic, amazing game, but every game they've made since then, in my opinion, has been kind of terrible. Man of Medan was just awful. It felt low effort, low budget, and House of Ashes I couldn't even finish. I thought it was very boring. Why I gave this a chance is beyond me. It's really because they promised it was more like a spiritual successor to Until Dawn, and it wasn't part of their anthology series. So I gave it a chance, and honestly, it is just as good, if not better, in some ways than Until Dawn. It's just fantastic. I really, really want Supermassive to just give up on the Dark Picture anthology and do more of these. Less is more. This is a bigger, high quality, high effort AAA experience, whereas the Dark Picture anthology are smaller, low budget efforts, and they're pumping out more of them, but I'd much rather have more of these because they're bigger and higher quality. Honestly, it's spooky, it's scary, it leans into its tropes in a way that works. The characters are really good. I cared about them dying or surviving. They have an ability to take what could be very corny and very cheesy premises and turning them into fantastic games. Number 7, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. I gave it a 9 out of 10 as our pick for best action game of 2022. Call of Duty is back, my friends. I have to say that I am so relieved that this game was good, because I will admit I really truly hated the last 2 installments of Call of Duty. I don't know what was going on at Activision. They really struggled throughout the pandemic because they turned out some really terrible games. Vanguard was played by nobody, but it wasn't terrible, especially in comparison to Cold War. Cold War I gave, I think, like a 3 or a 4 because I hated just how copy and paste it felt from the previous. But this is, they course corrected. This is back to being great. Honestly, I think that this campaign is top 5 material. It was just so well executed. It had amazing characters, amazing settings. It had variety of gameplay. I just felt like I was a part of a high, big budget action war movie, and it was fantastic. And that's on top of the fact that we got a major update to Warzone 2. We have the new DMZ mode. The multiplayer aspect of this is top notch, and the story of the campaign was also just top notch. I really just love everything about the game. I've had no problems from a technical aspect. And I mean, the only complaint I had and other gamers had, and it's fair, but it has a kind of confusing and messy UI for the game, and I do stipulate that, but I don't think that's enough to distract from the experience of the story and the multiplayer. It's one of the best Call of Duties we've gotten in years, and I think it's actually an improvement over the reboot from a few years ago. Number 6, Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. Also gave it a 9 out of 10. I also labeled it as our best family game. I went back and forth on this pick. I almost gave that title to Kirby, but this is a game that has the benefit of better hardware, whereas Kirby did not. And I just enjoyed this experience more from a technical aspect, and it also is, of course, Star Wars. But this is also something that I've never even played a Lego game for more than 5 minutes. This is the first Lego game that I've played to any substantial amount, let alone to completion. And this is how I went into one of the best games of the year. It is hard to believe that the first game like this we got for Star Wars was actually a Lego game. It's the saga-spanning, massive, open, multi-world, multi-character Star Wars game. It just makes so incredible sense that it completely surprises me that no one's really done this way before. It makes me want a traditionally rendered game just like this one. But that being said, in a way, the Lego aspect not only didn't take away from the game, but I actually think it added to it. So you see, for the first time in my life, I got to experience this story that I've watched 1,000 times, and it actually felt fresh. There were little nods and jokes and tweaks that were enough to make such an incredibly familiar story feel also new. It did this also without diminishing the original either. You see, that's this balance that I'm really just surprised they pulled off. It wasn't too goofy that it took away from the story, but it didn't feel like a Disney live action movie does, where it just feels like the exact same experience, but in a different format. I was also just kind of impressed at the wide appeal that this could have. It didn't feel like it was something just for kids. It was something that it can be simple, but it wasn't so simple that it was boring. It kept me engaged. There was enough there that as an adult, I could actually enjoy this, even though they managed to maintain that kid-friendly game. The only negative I really had is what I called pseudo co-op. Is that there were times where they inserted a secondary character into scenes that there wasn't a secondary character before, where it was only the protagonist and a villain. And oftentimes that was like a droid or a know nothing character. So if you were playing this co-op, somebody would be stuck with the boring character that wouldn't be as helpful or as fun to play as. So like if you had the choice between like Luke Skywalker and some random gonk droid, one of the two players is going to have more fun, especially in boss battles. There were boss battles where the secondary character felt useless, like shooting a little blaster at Emperor Palpatine. But so I don't recommend the co-op experience. I didn't like it, but from a solo standpoint, I think it's good. I guess the co-op could be good if you were playing with a much younger player who did need a simple character to play as, and that's probably what they were going for. But I wouldn't recommend it between a co-op between two gamer experienced players. Number 5, Entropy Center. I also gave a 9 out of 10. Entropy Center is a game that the moment I first saw it, I had to play it. The moment I first played the pre-release demo, I had to buy it. It was just, I just instantly wanted this game, and I loved it. It's beyond me how this game is not being mentioned by other outlets. I haven't really seen any major outlets even talking about this one. This game proves to me that the major outlets only ever play the same few indie games that their friends talk about, because this is fantastic, honestly. I'm convinced that IGN and GameSpot and Kotaku, all these guys that just know each other, that all these reviewers, they just play the same 7 indie games that they each learn from each other, and then it's easy for them to miss these types of things, because this is one of the best games of the year, and no one's talking about it. Like this, more people need to talk about this one. It's a Portal-like. It has that classic wake up in an abandoned science lab premise. However, instead of a portal gun, the gun in this game actually like rewinds an object's entropy. It rewinds it in time, essentially. This game is just beautifully done. The Endless Science Lab is actually on the moon. It's just phenomenal. It's beautiful. The game is affectionately referred to in its fan base as Portal 3 that we're never going to get. The voice acting, story, terrific. The robot in it is really fun. I really liked it. The puzzles do start off easy, and they do eventually get hair-pullingly difficult. I will say that there's definitely a difficulty spike at one point in the game. There was this one puzzle that I swear I must have tried it 37 times before I just went on YouTube and looked up how to do it. I would say that if Valve was smart, they would find this developer and just give them a giant budget and team to help them make Portal 3. This game is just... It's different enough to justify its existence. It's different enough to feel new and fresh. You don't feel like you're playing a Portal clone because it has enough premise, enough story, enough differences. But you get to re-experience that similar feel of Portal, but in a different premise. And I loved everything about this. This is the type of game that is inspired by a game in a healthy and right way. Just like how the Soulsborne has inspired its own genre based on the Souls games. This is a Portal-like in every way, and it's fantastic. Watching the Earth, so spoiler, minor spoiler, you get it early in the demo or in the trailer, but actually within the beginning of the game as well. But you're trying to save planet Earth. Earth is like in the process of like exploding, and you're trying to power up this giant laser to shoot at it and rewind it. It's just really cool to watch. And this game's a must play, and it's really a shame that not enough people are talking about this one. So definitely check this one out. It's on Steam. Moving on to number 4, Vampire Survivors. I gave it a 9 out of 10, and it was actually also our Indie Game of the Year 2022 pick. Vampire Survivors is a game that is a testament to the benefits of Game Pass. I support indie games all the time. We have our monthly indie game roundup. We have our bi-weekly indie game featurettes. We do all this stuff, and we have our indie game list of the year. However, every now and then I come across a game that I really honestly would only have tried because it was on Game Pass. I remember exactly my first reaction to Vampire Survivors. if you had told me that this was going to end up being our indie pick for the game of the year, and it was even in it was being considered for game of the year, I would have laughed, because I did, my first reaction to this was just negative. I heard people talking about it, and it was getting more and more buzz. I checked it out and I judged a book by its cover. I even remember making a face, just kind of mentally going ew when I saw it. Just, I'm sorry to on a teeny tiny chance any one of the developers sees my article or sees this video, but my first impression is this game kind of looks kind of ugly. It's definitely not going to win any art style or visual graphic fidelity awards whatsoever. And to be honest, even after playing it, a lot of it, I still think it looks ugly. Pixel art and retro games can be done in a way that's still visually appealing, visually beautiful, that look great. I don't hate games trying to be retro or trying to look like this. I just don't think that this game is visually attractive in any way. I feel like the retro and the pixel art can be pretty, but this is not it. This game, the looks of it reminds me of just like old browser games, something I played as a child. Back when computers were beige and plastic. I remember clicking on this game's page and just looking at it and just going, nope. But I kept hearing more about it. Kept getting more and more praise. It started making early lists. It got Game of the Awards nominations. I'm gonna give it a chance. I mean, I was like, it was free with Game Pass after all, so like there's no harm in trying it. So I tried it out, and at first it was kind of weird because it's also I didn't know this either, but it's an auto player. So you don't hit a command to cause the main character to attack or anything. The character just auto attacks with its different abilities over time. So to say this game is an absolute Trojan horse of fun, it's an understatement. I absolutely expected to hate it, and I loved every second of it. It's perfect for long game sessions or short ones. I don't like roguelikes. I don't like auto players. I don't like the way the game looks. This game has everything I hate except the fact that I love it. I hate the visuals, I hate roguelikes, I hate everything in this game normally except the fact that I love this game. It's really hard to explain. It's just fantastically well done. The fact that these developers took a game that it's a single input control. You literally just move the character around and the character attacks on a timer. It's literally like a single input game, and you move the character around. That's all you do, and you're just attacking endless swarms of enemies. And I think it doesn't look impressive. It looks very misleading in terms of its visual impressiveness, and the gameplay itself is very, very simple, and yet somehow it managed to be incredibly entertaining, and it is on most top 10 lists that I've seen. It is very high up there. I did consider it for our top pick, but it just barely beat out by the next three. But this game it'll surprise you. You'll look at it and you might like not believe it's going to be the case, but it definitely is a winner. Number 3, Marvel Snap, 9 out of 10. Our best mobile game of 2022. Marvel Snap is a game that I'm surprised, just like Vampire Survivors, I'm really surprised that I gave it a shot, let alone loved it as much as I do. Like Vampire Survivors, it is a game that is everything I usually hate, and yet I can't stop playing it. In my review, I said it had every red flag to me. It's a free-to-play mobile game that with a major IP license. I mean, usually this just screams low-effort cash grab, pay-to-win, predatory garbage. Plus, it's a card game. I hate card games. Like, it's not a genre that I would ever normally even try, let alone enjoy. I think it's, honestly, in my opinion, one of the most boring genres imaginable, and yet they somehow managed to make it beyond fun. These developers are just, they're wizards. I mean, Marvel Snap surprised me in every way. It's fun, addictive, incredibly well made. The A-list heroes casually, like if you're getting the A-list heroes like Hulk, Iron Man, some of these characters you can get very early on, and they're not gatekept behind certain predatory paywalls or anything like that. They don't have overpowered abilities. I mean, I got Iron Man and Hulk for free, and they're pretty effective. And what's nice is that it's not just like the popular heroes because I envision how this could have been way worse. They could have paywalled the common ones, the ones that people really know, like Iron Man and Hulk and Thor. They could paywall these characters and made them super powerful, and you have to fork over all this money for them. But no, you can get some of these popular characters for free. And but on the flip side, some of the lesser known characters can be really fun. And I'm actually starting to learn more and more about some heroes that I didn't even know about, and I consider myself a pretty big Marvel fan. And some of the most powerful characters in the game are heroes that you may not have heard of before. There's just so much replay value, and each battle only takes a few minutes. It can be done. It's something you can just be done in a few minutes, or you can play for hours. I will say that this game has become part of my daily routine. I definitely have to play a couple rounds each day, just part of my wake up or going to bed routine. It's just fantastic. I feel like the top few of this year are closer than ever before. I really did debate on this one. I considered putting it all the way at the top. I really did consider this one for Game of the Year. And I know it's just a simple free Marvel card game, but it is really that fantastic. I joined a group on Facebook where just other Marvel Snap fans, and it's just a fun community to be a part of. This one came in only at 3, but it almost hit the top spot. Before we dive into my top 2 picks, I want to give some honorable mentions to some games. I already talked about why Elden Ring was not included. It's just not for me. I can't. It's not. But I know why. I get why people love it. But there's some other games that I wanted to give a shout out in here. Plague Tale Requiem, fantastic game. I thought its PC performance was pretty poor, but from a story and visual standpoint, when it worked, because I did switch to the Series X version, which played a little better. Ultimately, the game it's okay. It's a good story if you like narrative focused games. There is one game that I think maybe not quite as obvious as Elden Ring, but is another obvious one that people might wonder why it's left out. But Horizon Forbidden West is one that I strongly considered for my list. I almost gave it Overwatch 2's spot because I do think it's technically better. It's a technical marvel of a game. It's visually beautiful. I really don't have any complaints about it, other than the fact that I just kind of got bored with it. I'm getting a little bit of fatigue with Sony's tried and true template. It just felt like another Sony game, and it's very good. I just wasn't having that much fun. And that's hard to describe because you have, on one hand, you have this 10 out of 10 technical execution, but on the other hand, I wasn't enjoying the experience that much. So some people put it as a 10 out of 10 Game of the Year contender. Some people might even have it at the top of their list. Some people think that it's being robbed of the well-deserved awards. And I can't blame any of you who might think that. It just wasn't for me. Another game that I really strongly considered for this list and also has made itself a daily part of my routine is Wordle. Wordle became a cultural phenomenon in 2022. The couple things left it off this list. It is just too much fun factor and not enough technical excellence. It's just very, very simple, and it's just incredibly fun and addicting. Some people might debate whether or not it deserves the spot on the list because some people argue whether or not it's truly a video game. I would argue that if Immortality can be a video game, then so can this. It's you play it on mobile devices. It's not the type of puzzle that can easily be replicated with pen and paper. It really does need a digital input. So it's definitely a lot of fun. So I wanted to give it at least an honorable mention here. If they had doubled down on that potential, made an official app, made multiple modes, made multiple puzzles, maybe some type of service, there's so much more that could have been done with this rather than just kind of the developer just sold it to the New York Times and all they've done with it so far is just keep it the status quo. There's a lot that could have been done with this that I think would have added some of that technical excellence. So if there were multiple puzzles, a full-on app, all this other stuff you could do, if they added more sharing and social features, they could have added so much to it that would have added the technical excellence. It could have actually gotten itself a spot on this list. Kirby, I did mention it, almost getting my family pick, but the problem with Kirby is just I'm really getting kind of tired and bored with the Switch because the Switch is just so asthmatic in 2022. It cannot compete from a technical standpoint with games that I'm playing on my PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X. It doesn't even have any type of 4K upscaling, so these games just on a TV look really terrible, and it really hinders games. If this game had been ported to PC and had full resolution, this game probably would have made it on the spot. It was a little too easy. I definitely think it needed some more difficulty modes, but I would have liked a harder difficulty for it. But honestly, it's just the Switch held back this game. If Nintendo was smart and they would ever do finally release a Pro Switch that keeps being rumored that gave us 4K upscaling, this game would have been better. But it's being hindered by old, outdated hardware, in my humble opinion. Coming in at number 2, we have Lost Ark. To say that I really debated where this was going to go is a little bit of an understatement. Lost Ark is one of my favorite games of the year. It was the first 10 out of 10 that I released, and it was heavily considered for Game of the Year. It's just fantastic, and I will say that I'm genuinely surprised at why this game isn't on more lists from major outlets, why it wasn't talked about enough, because it was actually interesting to me because this game, you might be surprised to learn, is actually one of the most popular games of the year. It broke multiple Steam records. It ranked, I think, as high as number 2 in like all-time played list. Had over 1 million concurrent players. Everybody and their cousin downloaded and played this game. It was so popular at launch that they even had to delay the free-to-play version of it because the Founders Edition's players were still trying to get in due to long server times. It wasn't bad service, it was just immensely popular. And when I finally got in, it was just a fantastic game to play. And what I thought was interesting is that most of the major news outlets like Kotaku, IGN, GameSpot, they were all so busy covering games like Elden Ring and Horizon Forbidden West, and even Dying Light. I think I saw maybe one review. I'm not saying that none of them reviewed it, but I only saw like one article on this game, or maybe 1 or 2 reviews on it. It didn't get the coverage that I expected due to just how popular and overpopulated February was. So I think this game, from a critical standpoint, got a little bit ignored, but from a popularity standpoint, this game definitely attracted players. Just about me and all of my friends and most of my coworkers, we were all playing it. And it's just a fantastic game. I will say there is a tiny technicality on this release that I considered but rejected in order to qualify for this list, is that this game technically launched way back in 2019. So it's actually a couple years old, but the reason it qualifies for this list is because it didn't launch in the West until 2022. So the fact that half the globe didn't get this game until this year, I felt qualified it under the significant cultural impact clause that I put in there. Is that for release dates, we are pretty strict in terms of the year, but there are exceptions to be made in terms of like cultural impact or partial releases. We're flexible on early access and things like that. So it definitely qualifies for this list, and I think that being a 2022 Western release title is a big enough justification for it, because this game is just too fantastic to not show up on this list. One thing that I really loved about this game is its combat. It is one of the most fun combat experiences I've had in recent years. It's just incredible how versatile it is. See, when you launch the game for the first time, you get a choice between a bunch of dozens of different possible protagonist characters, and they're all very different in how they play. And once you pick one, there's subclasses, and within each subclass too, it offers a lot of variety. So I chose the Deathblade Assassin, and the Deathblade Assassin is a melee character, and I usually pick like a mage of some type, but this character just looked really cool, had a really cool design, and I was just intrigued by the triple sword setup that we have with them. The triple sword threat is really cool because we've seen dual blading before, but we've seen characters wield 2 swords, but seeing a character with 3 swords was just very unique to me. And it's just very visually impressive. In fact, the triple sword made it onto our best weapons list. And what I thought is it's just really fun to play. And one thing that was new and unique to me was just there's so many different types of attack combos within this one character. For a game that offers so many different types of characters you can play as, you'd expect them to be kind of one note and one-dimensional, but the Deathblade Assassin has like 8 different attack combos that are customizable, and they're all very visually different. So you would think that there's only so many ways to swing a sword, but it keeps it fresh just within this one character, and I didn't even play all the other different types of heroes that you can play as, and I've watched videos of their combat, and they're all just very visually different. Another thing that really impressed me about this game is it's a unique genre that I don't normally like, but it really won me over. You see, I don't particularly like the top-down dungeon crawler type games, the far-away perspective. I typically would prefer a first-person or a third-person perspective to be closer to the character. You spend a lot of time customizing your character, grinding out for armor for them. I don't like games that typically have you 20 feet away from your character up in the sky. But in this game, it really works because during cutscenes and at most moments, you can actually zoom in and still see the details of your character. But the high view battle perspective actually works in this game because you're typically seeing, this also ties into the gameplay, you're typically seeing dozens of enemy types on screen at any given time. Some games really struggle with just how many enemies you're facing at any given time. And this game really excels in that, to where it really does make you feel like an unstoppable, very powerful protagonist, because it's always you versus 20 bad guys. There's always so many enemies on screen, and they respawn very quickly, so you're just constantly fighting massive armies, and it definitely is a scope that we don't get to see very often. It's pulled off very, very well. The story is also really good. It's nothing like narratively groundbreaking. It's a pretty, I would say, a relatively simple story. There's a bad guy, there's a kingdom you're defending. It's nothing too crazy outside the scope of what you'd expect in a normal fantasy MMO. But I found it entertaining and the characters entertaining, but I think it's the combat and just the massive scope of this game that really solidified it. My top three, I really debated back and forth the correct order for this. And finally, coming in at number one. This one is probably of little surprise to many of you. As I've said before, I've called this year, 2022, the tale of two games is what I've called it, where it's really boiled down in most major outlets, most major news media. It's really been made this a battle between God of War Ragnarok and Elden Ring. I've explained why I didn't include Elden Ring on this list, but it should come as little surprise that God of War Ragnarok enters this at the number one spot. I'll be honest, this is probably one of the closest years in recent memory where I really heavily debated my top three. Marvel Snap and Lost Ark are two absolutely fantastic games that surprised the heck out of me, and both of which were heavily considered for the top spot. In fact, I also recorded an alternate variant of this video where I actually gave it to Lost Ark narrowly, but I hadn't finished God of War Ragnarok yet, which is actually part of... So this game actually held back our entire Best of 22 event because I was still finishing God of War Ragnarok, because it's a really long game in terms of it. It's like 25 hours, which is definitely not the longest out there, but it's longer, and it was a late game, and I got to it a little bit late, and I've been trying to get through it. And I was leaning towards Lost Ark, but I was just like, I can't give it to Lost Ark before I finish God of War Ragnarok. And because I was maybe about 10 hours into God of War when I started working on our best of event stuff and started doing preliminary work for this event. And I was leaning towards Lost Ark, but I had beaten Lost Ark back in February, so it's been a while. And God of War Ragnarok, one thing I will say is that the first 10 hours is a little slow. I almost felt comfortable giving it the number two spot because I was just kind of like, the first 10 hours, not a lot happens. It is a very slow build up. I felt like it just did, in the first 10 hours, it doesn't introduce anything new over the original, and it didn't just narratively, not much happens. But one thing I will say is that this is a game that, narratively speaking, is very heavy in the second and third acts. This is a game that you have to play through the end, because once you start getting into the story, you start unlocking new abilities, start meeting new enemy types, this game really shines. I will say that maybe the first couple hours might seem a little slow, but that's okay because it builds up to some fantastic set pieces, fantastic storytelling. You start unlocking new weapons and exploring new areas. It becomes as incredible and worth all the praise that it is getting. One thing I will say is that there is a late game story twist that I will not spoil in this video, but the narrative twist that does happen very late in the game really does change the perspective. I did not see it coming, and it really helps us understand why Odin is the antagonist of this game. one of the things that struggled with me in the first 10 hours was you don't really fully understand why Odin is the bad guy. You see, like everybody, all the characters kind of like hate him, but it doesn't. Especially from Kratos and Atreus' perspective, they don't really have a good reason to hate him. See, in the first 10 hours or so, and even the first half of the game, Odin's really done nothing to Kratos or Atreus. I mean, there's a lot of history that they talk about, and some of the side characters share their story. So yeah, we know he's the bad guy, but we as the player don't really see it. But it isn't until later that we really start to get some twists and some context that really solidify Odin as actually one of the better characters of the year, and he also made it onto our top 10 or top 5 character list. So Odin's really cool in this game. I just love the way they portray Thor. Thor in this game is just fantastic. He's just menacing and a brute and a tank. And I was watching an interview where they talked about how they took inspiration more from the Hulk than they did from like MCU Thor while building this character. And I could definitely see that he's more of a Hulk with a hammer than what we as a lot of in the popular nerdy fan base of the MCU would associate with Thor. This game, there's a lot of things that this game does phenomenally better than its predecessor. While I wasn't convinced at first because there's a little bit of slow build up in the story, this game has so much better enemy variety and it has better weapon variety. Whereas in the first game, you play with the Leviathan axe for the majority of the game, and you don't get his chaos blades until much later. This game, you start with both weapons very early on, and you do get actually a third weapon a good chunk of the way into the game that offers more weapon variety. And there's more abilities and more just combos and just various things that you can do. I will say that it took a little while to get used to the controls. The remapping isn't where I want it to be because there is one particular mapping combo that I want to do that isn't in there. But once you get used to it after about 10 hours, it does become feeling natural. One thing I will say is that the enemy variety is fantastic. That's probably one of my few critiques of its predecessor. I did feel like in the first game we just kept fighting the same version of a troll over and over again, that there was a very limited number of enemies in comparison to this game, whereas in this game different worlds offer different enemy types, and it just seems more frequent that we're seeing new enemies throughout the game, and even different types. It isn't just like slightly different, cosmetically looking different skins of like undead zombie type creatures. Like we're seeing like ghosts and wisps and animals and and dragons and all of these things, and the big boss areas aren't just similar looking trolls. So the enemy variety is definitely enhanced in this game. Where this game really starts to excel is just the characters. They're just real. The character acting in this is phenomenal. I definitely understand why Christopher Judge won Best Performance in this, because he's just fantastic. Another thing that this game introduces that is done very well is just also like protagonist variety, in that we get to play as Atreus for the first time and really get to play a good chunk of the game as him, and his combat is very different and plays very different, and keeps the game feeling fresh. We also get squad mates. So basically, most of the game you're going to spend with a companion who you can order and have do things. It's just really well done in every regard. Other than just a little bit of a slow build up in the beginning, I really have very few negatives of this game. This game is our second 10 out of 10 for the year, and I didn't want to just pick this game because every other outlet was praising it so highly. I knew going in that this was the year of two games, and this battle between Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok. I didn't like Elden Ring at all, and I wasn't sure of God of War either. But once I got into it and I started getting past the halfway mark, I started to really see why this was one of the most visually impressive, narratively impressive, and most fun gameplay of the year. And it truly is worth all of its accolades. So that is why we picked God of War Ragnarok for our pick for Game of the Year. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this Best of 22 event. If you follow us on Twitter or Instagram, you'll see a variety of community polls and community picks where we talk about a lot of different things over the past year. We also have several articles on various top 10 lists. And I would also like to thank our sponsor. If you would like to check out Chibi Tea, They are an anime tea brand that is a really cool combo. They sell delicious teas, and all of the teas have a really cool anime character associated with them. It's really cool. They come in special collectible tins. Use promo code GameInfinite to check it out to get a 10% discount. Thank you and enjoy our Best of 22 event. We'll see you guys on the next Game Infinite video.